I'm Les Youngbar. I was the chief of police in Lake Oswego, and I was president of the association the year 99-2000. I was doing a little back research on what was happening in the world because I remembered it. It seemed like a very unsettled time, and then I thought, well, you know, it probably always seems that way in modern history. But in reality, in those years, 99-2000, we were facing the Y2K thing, and I can remember in our city and probably everywhere else, you know, the big topic of discussion was what kind of research are we going to do? What do we need to do to back our systems up? Is everything going to collapse? You know, and it really was. We had a special committee that just dealt with that at the city. So we had that, and the internet was starting, actually. But there were like, I was doing some research, and I found out in that year there were only 150,000 users worldwide.
Wow.
If you can imagine, I'm sure we have over 150,000 users probably in a smaller area than the Portland metro area, probably close to the Salem metro area now. So that was a big deal. But in terms of the world politics, we had in that time both the Russian president, Yeltsin, and Bill Clinton go through impeachment proceedings. And if you can imagine two of the most powerful countries in the world at the time going through that and the instability, and it did feel a little funny. I mean, people were going like, well, what are we going to do if, you know, if they just get the boot? Who's coming next? I mean, in our country we knew, but we didn't know what would happen in Russia. And they both survived that and went on. But then Russia in particular took some actions that I think had some very long-term effects, if you will. And one was when they basically declared war, I guess you'd call it, or a military action at the minimum, against Chechnya and Dagestan, or I hope that's the right pronunciation. And it was really against Islamics or Islamic separatists who wanted a separate country, much like has also happened later in Georgia. I can remember going through that at that very day, you know, and I remember just like rushing to work. I actually was, I'll never forget, I bet we all remember, those of us that are old enough to remember, you know, what we were doing, but I actually was standing, we always watched the morning news while getting ready, and I was just getting a tie on and getting ready to go to work, and my wife had said, a plane has hit one of the Twin Towers in New York. And I'm going, I walked in and I looked, and there was a lot of, you know, there was a lot of smoke and fire. And I said, well, that can't be an accident. You can't run into that tower. It can't be an accident. See, my mind immediately went to, this was a criminal act, which, I mean, I don't know why. This is part of our nature, I think, as police people. And while I was standing there, the second plane hit the tower. And of course we were, you know, it was that super emotion about, you know, oh my God, look what's happening to all these people, and this is horrible and all that. But then it was like, well, we got to pull it together and I got to get to work. Because we have no idea if this is just the beginning or not. And while all around the country, I'm sure there was a lot of, you might in retrospect say, hey, you overreacted. I don't know that you can overreact to something like that. You can definitely underreact and pay a heavy price. And so we did a number of things in our little city just in case, you know, till we just knew what was going on. Like we closed off the parking lot underneath the city hall, basically to read, and then actually monitor the access in and out. Just did that before the day even got started. It's the first thing I consulted with my boss, the city manager, and said, I think we need to just do this till we just know what's going on. You know, maybe it's nothing, but I mean, we know something horrible happened, but maybe it won't impact us. But I don't know if we can take that risk.
Right. Interesting.
Because we've been hearing chatter, you know, through our interactions with federal agencies and stuff, that there were things going on. You know, they were really monitoring things. I mean, no one realized the magnitude of that. But anyway, so I think the state was shuddering a little bit, and we just had to move on. So, well, that wasn't really in my year, it was right thereafter.
Exactly.
I can just remember that, what a huge thing that was.
I do too.
And you can imagine, I mean, we weren't quite as dependent on computers as we are now, but we we're at those stages where we had already begun word processing, and we were running payrolls, and all those sorts of things were occurring. And if you can just imagine just losing that. In the long run, though, I think we often joked about it later and said, well, one thing this did is it really got us in a lot better, from a business continuity standpoint, it got us in a lot better position, because we started actually figuring out, we need to do these backups. We need to store off-site. We, need to always be evaluating our system. Yeah. And so in a way, it kind of just gave everybody a knock on the noggin. Probably stuff some of our IT folks who had been trying to kind of tell us, but we had a very small number of folks there. It was just a little different than it is now. And it really got us to a place where we probably needed to be anyway. Well, I think, and I can't just limit it to the as president. I know that says that, but the truth is it starts when you get in the chairs. And maybe for that matter, I would say in my case, it started actually when I just became involved in the association. I got very involved in on the lobbying group at the very beginning of my, probably in around 87 or so, I think, when I started participating in the association. And I worked with somebody who had done it literally by themselves, Brian Riley. Okay. And kind of had a reputation for being sort of a one-man show, if you will. And we had very little support from our association staff or support, unlike today. And so I learned, I learned a lot. First of all, going to the legislature, testifying, talking to legislators, and also learning to work with somebody who had never really worked with anybody else and kind of liked to do his own thing. And we got along splendidly. I learned that, I needed to sort of listen to what he had to say and take his perspective in, and then move from there. And he had a lot to share. He had a lot of wisdom about the legislature, where I think some people had sort of said, oh, you don't want to do that. I said, well, I do want to do that. So I did it. And then ultimately led to actually chairing that group during a time when we were trying to find our way to find an effective Kevin Campbell, if you will. So we went through that process where I was doing a lot of the stuff that that now Kevin does, as a matter of fact, and certainly not as effectively. So it meant coming to Salem, 3 days a week in session, and so it was there was a lot of growth. And then as I got into the chairs, it just, you start taking other assignments on. Maybe the president says, hey, could you do this or you do that? And for me, I made a little list of it goes far beyond this, but of some very significant stuff that happened during those years, some while president, some prior to, actually some that went on afterwards. There is life after presidency and past president. Certainly I was on, I got appointed to the governor's, originally the AG's Public Planning and Safety Council. Okay. And that was Kulmagowski. It was something that he had thought would be a good idea to get input. And it was such a good group and so interesting. And I met a lot of different folks that I didn't know prior to that, from different aspects of I guess I would say criminal justice, because it wasn't just law enforcement, but judges and people that represented the courts and people that represented the AG's office, and somebody from the District Attorney's Association, that sort of thing. And that's when we began to delve into, well, what if we were to change this law or that law? And then you start getting perspective on, well, if we do that, maybe the sheriffs are going like, whoa, wait a minute, if you do that, the jails are it's gonna explode, or, we don't have the budget for that, or the judges are saying, man, I don't know if we can prosecute, those sorts of things. And then that progressed on to the governor. The governor then took that over, actually first Hardy Myers, and then when he was AG, and then the governor took it over directly, Governor Kidsopper. And And so we brought in a lot of different elements and discussed other things as well. In fact, as I was mentioning, after I was president, I was still on that group, and we were in the throes of the post 9/11 stuff, and just took on a whole new element, occasionally interacting with federal authorities. So I would have never had that opportunity, I don't think, if it hadn't been for that. And it did create a lot of growth, and I'll get into some of that in a minute. But I was also on a juvenile justice committee where we looked at, we worked again with people from the youth authority, with folks from the courts that dealt with youth, with sheriffs and other police chiefs, although there weren't a lot of us, and legislators. And then you get this huge perspective about what if we tweak this, what happens? And then I worked also on I was on the state HIDA, the high intensity drug trafficking group, for quite some time. And I may have been on, we were very active as an agency in that group, and I could have maybe been on that anyway, but I have a feeling it's the exposure where someone said, hey, listen, would you participate in the HIDA? And then I also participated on a state gaming, where we looked at state gaming laws. And that brought in, a most interesting element of folks. There again, legislators, police folks, people in the justice system, people, the head of the restaurant association, the lobbyists for the restaurants, because, you change certain things, it impacts the way they do stuff, and the gaming in bars and that sort of thing, lounges. Folks from the tribes, who really didn't have any obligation to interact with us, but we actually had one of the members who was at the head of one of the tribes at Grand Ronde, at Spirit Mountain, on the committee, and I got a whole different perspective, on how they felt. He was actually a very open-minded guy, but many members came and testified, and they did so sort of begrudgingly, because they felt like, we've been granted this authority through compact in the state, but it's a federal thing, and it's something that we have a right to do, and we really have no obligation to report to you. It's like, wow, I guess we didn't approach that request very well. We were only interested in, how it was going for them, and how this, how these compacts impacted them, and all that. And I did learn that there were some very hard feelings about the cost to them in the state compact, to have the state police sort of monitor their compliance with the compact and do some other background stuff for them. And so I guess bottom line, if you look at all these various assignments and some other ones that I had and got to participate in, is that the growth comes from the fact that, besides just, I guess, the sort of knowledge, is if you don't begin to understand this, then there's something wrong, that there are all these different interest groups out there. Right? So anytime, we'd sit in an association meeting and say, we ought to change this, and why can't we? Why doesn't this happen? Whatever that might be in the law, you begin to realize, well, yeah, but then that might affect the sheriffs or the folks in the criminal justice system, or the folks at the youth authority, or restaurant owners, or you begin to realize that it's important when you're working on anything that's of any sort of state level magnitude, or even local for that matter, that you get enough input, the right contingency of people, to really get a solution that's going to work for as best as it can for everybody. It's not going to work for everybody. There's always give and take, but that you need to be ready to give and take. That's the bottom line. The first two people I put down were Jim Souls and Mike Cahill, because they both had been presidents in the 2 years prior to me. And so I had a lot of interaction going through the chairs with them, and I had countless times that I would call and say, hey, what was going on when you were doing this? Because we'd be doing a lot of the same things. If you have good continuity within your board, you remember that, you go like, oh yeah, we were working on that last year, or 2 years ago, or that came up once before, whatever that might be. And those two were just there. I mean, anytime. And of course, if I couldn't do something, Mike would as past president, so it was just, I would think any president would say this. You know, it would be on their mind for sure. And then I'd have to say, somebody who's been a member of the association and is now a past chief, Helen Bykart, who was a captain in the department when I was president. She did so much to back me up, keep an eye on the department. I never had to worry about a thing. It was just like having a rock there. It probably wouldn't be as obvious, but it was to me, was Bob Tardif. And there's a real story behind this that I think members of the association could appreciate, is that we were not very participative in the SACOPs and the state associations that's affiliated with IACP. And we had a chance to sort of get on board, if we will, and somebody had come to me and said, you know, are we going to do this, or will you do this? And I asked Bob if he'd do it. And I knew it was a big time commitment, and Bob had already given so much to the association. He'd already been a president, and he was always there working on something, every meeting. And I don't think he reflected too long, and he said, well, yeah, I'll do it. I mean, I'll do that. I'll make that commitment. And he actually got involved in a way that we really hadn't been before. I mean, he was what I consider sort of the beginning of that link. And he reported back, he got involved. I mean, we began to realize the real benefits, importance of that. And I consider that the beginning of what led to both Kevin getting involved, you know, at the director level, and Kemp Barker, to a degree that was beyond my imagination some years later. And the association, I think, just has benefited immensely from that. I mean, you know, a lot, probably previously in other meetings at the IACP level, at the international level, they'd say, Oregon, where's that? You know, and I think now people really know. I mean, we are a participator and somebody, a group that somebody might come to and recognize. And then what we've gotten out of that is like so much back from Kevin about what's going on, or from Kent about you know, certain national trends and things to expect. And I mean, I just think there's just been a huge payoff there. Yeah. Huge. You know, there are all kinds of opportunities, and I'm just saying, if you want to pursue a career, you know, then do it with your full heart, and evaluate some of the things you can do besides just going out and enforcing the laws or traffic, which is all very important, and does save lives. But remembering that, you know, when you go on a call, usually a lot of your calls, either there's a victim there, there's a suspect there, there's both, you know, so there's some unhappy people. You're going to have a lot of negativity. You got to keep kind of an open-minded perspective about that. Remember, it's their worst day, you know, and just try not to let it become your worst day or make it worse for them. But you've got to learn to maintain balance with your family, your personal life, and your law enforcement life. Because law enforcement can become your life. It did mine for a while. And that includes maybe even developing, you know, hobbies. Some of the people I've seen that I look back on now, and I can't say that I'm one of them that was very good at hobbies, incidentally, but some of the ones I consider real success stories in our association are people that I've noticed, you know, they've got something going on. They've got a hobby. They're really engaged with their family. That sort of thing. And that makes you ultimately a better person when you're going to work too. So you don't totally get into that world and that focus so narrow. It keeps you broader in your perspective. And it also fills that happier pocket, or it should.